Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. For today's video, I wanted to take some time by going over the entirety of the Bitcoin cycle, analyzing every one of our 4-year cycles, and then talking a little bit about the way that I see the market playing out over the next 1 to 3 years. We're also going to be jumping into some of these altcoins, analyzing their 4-year cycles, talking about whether or not they even follow 4-year cycles, and most importantly, talking about what setups are looking to be the most profitable that are going to play out in the best ways for our profitability over the course of the next 2 years. There is a lot of warning signs in the market that are telling us this cycle is going to be much bigger than anything that we've ever seen. And for today's video, I'm going to break down exactly the way I see it and what it means for our long-term portfolios moving forward from here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And with that being said, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Alrighty guys, here we are to start off today's video. I had a few of you asking me to go into another analysis really regarding around the 4-year cycles, going into some more detail around that, some thoughts around what I think the market's going to be doing over the next 1 to 3 years, and just giving you guys an idea of how we can best prepare ourselves before this entirety of the cycle actually takes place. So right off the bat guys, I wanted to share with you guys this update because I think that this is going to be the most valuable touching point when it comes to the average person that maybe doesn't have a ton of investment knowledge or a lot of trading expertise or anything like that. Maybe you're just getting into crypto. I can just about guarantee you that if you want to make the most profitable, if you want to make the most money possible for your own portfolio, I don't think that there's a better solution than understanding the time frames of each cycle. So right off the bat, let's go through here. Now, the way you're going to measure a cycle, always remember this because this is the most important aspect when analyzing cycles and time. You have to start from the very bottom of the bear market, the low of the bear market, and then you draw the next data point, the very low of the next bear market. Because you guys gotta keep in mind that what we're doing when we're analyzing a cycle, we're trying to capture the entirety of the move. And the only way to capture the entirety is to start from the very bottom of the crash, because that's right where the new bull market starts every time, right? And we can see that we go through kind of the same sort of events, higher highs and higher lows. Eventually this leads to a blow off top, and then we do a 1-year bear market, leading us to the completion of that trend. Now, if we go through here and analyze a data point at every single one of our bear market bottoms, you guys will start to understand the pattern that's at play and the reason why we follow this, because there's truly nothing more accurate inside of the market. Now, the way that we analyze these, like I said, is analyzing from the bottom of the bear market to the bottom of the next bear market. Now, 4 years is the average distance in time that we've seen from the bear market bottom to the next bear market bottom. The only difference being this very first cycle right here. It was about 3.2 years rather than a full 4 years, but it's still roughly the same thing. Now, once we get to this cycle, and really the last 10 years of Bitcoin's price action, this is where we really start to follow these 4-year cycles even closer. We can see that this one was 1,428 days from the bottom to the next bottom. As you guys know, 1,450 days is a true 4 years. So this was almost spot on. It's getting even closer as the time has progressed. And we can see that even leading us into our last cycle, we saw the exact same distance of time from the bear market bottom to our bear market bottom here, from our bear market bottom in 2018 to the most recent one that we just finished, being at the end of the year 2022. So up to this point, there's a very obvious pattern that has played out. Every 4 years, Bitcoin finishes the bottom of its bear market, and they honestly end up correcting about the same each and every time as well. The only difference here is every cycle and every bear market, we have more money that comes into the market, right? Back here, when Bitcoin peaked at $31, we were looking at this being about $22 million in total market cap. So the amount of money that it took to get these big price movements, it was just very small. So when we're looking at time, we have to understand that the more liquidity that gets added to a market cap of any asset class, the less volatile that market will get, and also the more stable it will get over time. And we can kind of see that if we come over here and analyze and we draw from the top of our bull market to the top of the next one, you guys are going to be able to start to see that over the course of every one of these bull cycles, the amount of parabolic price action that we see is slowly starting to taper off. And we can actually see that there's getting to be this almost equilibrium point where the higher highs and the parabolic rallies are less significant, and we're starting to see this kind of rounded type action. And it's my apparent belief that the longer that we go into these cycles, the more rounded that this is going to get, and it's just going to take more time to get these same type of price movements. Now, right off the bat, I know a lot of you guys are going to be saying, well, then why are we going to follow a 4-year cycle? If what you're showing is that we're seeing a lengthening trend, why would we see a 4-year cycle? And the truth of the matter is this: we don't necessarily see a lengthening cycle. If anything, we've seen roughly the same cycle. This cycle, bear market to bear market, was about 3.2 years. This bear market to bear market was almost 4 years. And then once again, our last bear market was almost 4 years. So there is no real sign that's telling us the cycles are lengthening in any sort of way. And anybody that says that really doesn't have any data to really pull off of. And so the only thing that we have to go off of when it comes to time is the 4-year cycles. Now, it's not like we always have to follow the 4-year cycles either. And this is another important thing that we need to realize. Just because Bitcoin has followed this over the last 10 plus years, doesn't mean it's a guarantee that we're going to keep following it. In fact, the more that the market follows a specific pattern, the less likely it is to continue to follow that. And we got to keep in mind that when it comes to crypto, we're already in a very niche market. There's already not a significant amount of people investing into this market. So it's kind of hard to say, where we're at in the grand scheme of things, because even though a lot of people in crypto might know of 4-year cycles, we got to keep in mind that that's only a small amount of people as a whole, right? We might see people sharing it on Twitter and on Facebook groups and stuff, and it might seem like there's a lot of people that know about the 4-year cycle, but the truth of the matter is, I think that there's less amount of people that actually know about it when we're factoring in the full amount of money that's going to be coming into a cycle. Because we have to think about institutions. They're obviously way smarter. We're not factoring them into anything because they obviously know what they're doing. They're going to make profit. It's the retail investors that are the ones that drive the price every time. And so we got to keep in mind that the average retail investor doesn't hardly even know what crypto is. And when they do start to get into crypto, they're going to be buying things like Dogecoin, like Pepe, and just stuff because they heard their friend of a friend made 100 grand buying this 2 years ago, right? And that's generally the way it's going to work. Now, when it comes to watching this 4-year cycle, we do have the potential where maybe we'd follow something different. And this is where I think that it's important that we factor all of this in, because if we do see a difference in price action that varies itself comparatively to amongst the other cycles, then we have to understand that we could see something different play out. Now, right off the bat, guys, based off the 4-year cycles, we have been following this perfectly. So as of right now, because we bottomed and it was almost exactly 4 years from our last bear market bottom, we are expecting to see another 4-year cycle, right? But now comes into effect where, what if we see something different? What happens if the cycle ends up topping a little bit earlier? Now, to understand the fullness of these parabolic cycles, and specifically 4-year cycles, you have to understand what is a left and right translated cycle, because this is where we're going to have an idea of understanding the differences that can happen in the cycle. And we won't know if there is a difference unless you understand left and right translations, right? So remember, guys, a 4-year cycle is peak low of the bear market to peak low of the next bear market, and the time in between should be 1,450 days or close enough to. And up to this point, that's been the case every single one of our cycles. This one to this one was actually just a little bit shorter. But once again, all of that was just because we had less liquidity in the market at the time. It still followed a 4-year cycle nonetheless, because we still bottomed at the end of the year. Notice here, end of the year, 2011, bottom. End of the year, well, technically 2014 was the end of the year, but this was following that new year, January of 2015, bear market bottom. Once again over here, December 2018 bear market bottom. Once again over here, November. Every one of our bear market bottoms happens at the winter. So that's another little point that you can look at for understanding where we're at in the cycles, right? So remember, 4 years in between. We're also bottoming at the winter timeframes, and that's been the case every single one of our bear markets. So as it stands now, what is a left translated cycle? What is a right translated cycle? Well, the only way to understand that is to analyze the topping point of each bull market. So we're going to make this red so that you guys are able to see where the actual cycle top was. And then we're going to go through here and analyze, giving you guys an idea, breakdown, exactly what a left and right translation is. The only way to understand a left and right translation, first off, you have to pull the high of each cycle. And then second off, you have to find the midpoint of the cycle. So remember, an entire cycle from beginning is bear market bottom and ending is bear market bottom. So the midpoint of each bear market bottom will give us the medium of the cycle. So the middle ground of each cycle is actually 725 days. And this is where we're going to go ahead and actually draw our first key data point. We're going to go 728 because I'm on a weekly. So if you guys notice here, we're going to make these yellow for the middle point. So if you guys notice here, where did the cycle actually top? It topped on the right side of the midway point, which if we're looking at this cycle, we also have to factor in mind that this wasn't a full 4 years. This was only 1,155 days. So the middle point of this would actually be closer to 500 or 600 days, and that's where we would draw our middle point. So all you guys got to keep in mind, when we're analyzing the mid-range, it's just the halfway point from the cycle low to the cycle low. The time in between, you divide that by 2. So keep in mind that from the beginning to the top, this was 1,155 days. So 1,155 divided by 2 is actually 577. And that's where we're going to draw our mid-range point. So we can see that from the beginning of our cycle to the end of the cycle, the price of our top of our cycle peaked on the right side of our midway point. That's how we're going to understand what a left and right translation is. Whatever side that the peak of the market happens at, the top of the bull market, whatever side of the midway point that happens is going to dictate the likelihood of us having another 4-year cycle. So anytime that the all-time high of the bull market tops on the right side of the mid-range point, right? Mid-range point, we topped on the right side of that right here. Anytime we top on the right side of the mid-range point, it's called a right translated cycle. And when you have a right translated cycle, it means that the most likely scenario is that we're going to have continuation leading into another 4-year cycle. So if you guys notice here, mid-range, beginning of the cycle, end of the cycle, this is the mid-range point. We topped on the right side of the mid-range point. So likelihood scenario is that we have another right translated cycle, which just basically means a 4-year cycle. And we can see the same thing happened here. Now, this is where we get into a little bit of a difference in time. So this, we had 1,428 days inside of our entirety of the cycle. This was a little bit closer to a true 4 years. 1,428 divided by 2 gives us 714, and that's where we're going to draw our mid-range point. So we're going to go right there, and that gives us a mid-range point. So once again, guys, we're going to delete our old cycle so this doesn't confuse you anymore. We're going to remove these data points, and we're only going to be focusing on this cycle now. So right off the bat, we have the beginning of the cycle, we have the end of the cycle, we have the top of the cycle. Remember, the mid-range point between the low and the low is going to be 714 days. Where did our cycle top actually peak? Well, the right side of the mid-range point, right? We have right and we have left. This topped at the right side of the mid-range point. So once again, it was a right translated cycle. In the same way that because we peaked on the right side of this cycle, it told us most likely we're going to have another right translated cycle. So every time we have a right translation inside of a Bitcoin cycle, it shows continuation and another 4-year cycle. And that's the way that these trends actually work. So when we're looking at this, let's remove these data points and let's look at our current cycle today as an idea of what's happening. So if we come over here, remember this cycle was 1,428 days. It was the exact same distance as the other one we just analyzed. So the mid-range point is 714 days. It's going to be right there. We're going to draw our data point. And so once again, guys, where did we peak from the mid-range point? We peaked on the right side of the mid-range point. It wasn't the left. It was the right. That was where our cycle top actually occurred. Whether you draw the cycle top at 65 or 69, it still topped on the right side. So what this told us, our last cycle literally told us that most likely our current 4-year cycle that we just started right here, that we just started in this entire move, we just were told based off our last cycle that we're most likely going to end up having another right translation, which that's just another 4-year cycle. So out to this point, if you wanted to find anything that's the best thing to follow based off of, what's going to help me get in and out of the market, how am I going to know when to buy, how am I going to know when to sell, there's nothing better than the 4-year cycles because this has always told us what's going to happen. Now keep in mind, guys, because we peaked on the right side of the mid-range point, that tells us that this next cycle is going to be a right translation, which is why I personally lean towards this cycle playing out similarly to all of the rest. Now, if that's going to be the case, we got to keep in mind that because we just started this new 4-year cycle in November, Let's make this black so you guys can actually tell. This was our bear market bottom. This started a new 4 years. So we should be able to draw 1,450 days from that low, and that will give us our next bear market bottom. And that's where we're going to know when to buy again, which is projecting to be end of year 2026 for the end of our bear market, right? And so what that tells us is that we're going to be looking at about a 3-year bull trend from this bottom. And so that takes us to the end of the year 2025 as being our projected cycle top, right? And it's going to follow along in the same ways that all of our other cycles have ended up playing out. So now as we're getting into this current cycle, I think it's very important that we're factoring in all of our time frames here. So we got to keep in mind that 1,450 days is 4 years. So our projected bear market bottom is supposed to be the end of the year 2026. So remember, in a 4-year cycle, we have 3 years up and 1 year down. If we analyze the time from every one of our bear markets, they last almost exactly 1 year. This one from the high to the low was 364 days. The one in 2018 from the high to the low was 364 days again. The one in 2015 from the high to the low was a little extended. It was 413 days. And then this one here was actually a little shorter. So we do see a very similar type of pattern that's playing out. Like I stated, this cycle to this cycle had a little bit of a shorter bear market. It also had a little bit of a shorter bull market because of lack of liquidity. So I don't really focus on that one as much as I do with the last 3 cycles, because our last 3 cycles have been almost exactly the same every single time. And so when we're looking at these things, we understand that we have 3 years up, 3-year bull market, and then a 1-year bear market. That 1-year bear market ends and completes a 4-year cycle, being 1,428 days from the last cycle bottom. And that's been the case each and every one of our bear cycles. So not only do we have the same length of time in our bear market, but we have the same length of time in our bull market. And then when we analyze from the bottom of the bear to the bottom of the bear, it equals 4 years every single time. And so this is why I say that if you want to have something to stick to make the most money, I don't think that there's a better strategy than 4-year cycles. Now let's talk about the final thought to wrap up this video. We already talked a little bit about what happens inside of a right and left translation, but we only talked about a right translated cycle. So the way we analyze this is we go halfway from our bear market bottom to our projected bear market bottom, which is just 4 years, right? And so half of that is going to be somewhere, depending on where we bottom, we're going to be looking at about 750 days approximately, give or take a couple weeks or so, right? So that's going to be giving us a mid-range point. So when we're looking at this current cycle that we're in today, it's very important that we understand what happens if Bitcoin actually front runs this cycle. So as you guys can tell, from all of our prior cycles, from the high to us breaking a new all-time high, this one was 1,100 days. This one was probably closer to 1,200 days. Yeah, over 1,200 days. And this one was even shorter because it obviously was a shortened cycle. Now, with this current cycle today, if we're looking at another 1,100 days before we're at the point of breaking out, we're going to be at the mid-range point before we even start clearing all-time highs again, or around that point. So if we're to follow a normal 4-year cycle, we're going to be looking at Bitcoin going up here, probably going through a long-term consolidation, and then breaking out like this and completing a cycle. Remember, as long as Bitcoin tops on the right side of this mid-range point, then we're going to continue to expect to see a 4-year cycle. However, if what we see with Bitcoin here, maybe Bitcoin breaks out and we start actually front running. Let's say that we're into new all-time highs and we're way before this mid-range point, right? What if Bitcoin is doing something like this? It's hard to say, but what if we're sitting past all-time highs and we're even doing this before we've ever even hit this mid-range point? That would actually be the first time that Bitcoin's ever done that. And if Bitcoin is already into new all-time highs before we've hit the mid-range point, I'm personally going to be looking at a left translation. So once again, guys, in a right translation, it just means that we're topping on the right side of the mid-range point, which in a right translation, whenever we have one of those, it means continuation of the already prior trend. So we've already been following 4-year cycles. If we see a right translation, we're probably going to follow another 4-year cycle. However, if what we see is different, if what we see is actually us front running into new all-time highs before this mid-range point, and maybe Bitcoin's sitting at 120K or something before we ever hit this, and we end up topping early, that would be a left translated cycle, right? Where we actually ended up peaking on the left side of the mid-range point. Now this is where things get very tricky, because if we end up having an early cycle top, if Bitcoin front runs and we end up peaking on the left side of the mid-range point, it literally starts the opposite of a 4-year cycle. Instead of a bullish 4-year cycle where it's 3 years up and 1 year down, you actually start the inverse where it's 3 years down and 1 year up, right? And so keep in mind, every one of these cycles up to this point, we've always topped on the right side of the mid-range point. It's always been a right translated cycle. And because of this, the following cycles have always ended up being another 4-year cycle. It's just continued the same pattern. However, if this cycle is different, if this time truly is different, and we start front running this cycle, we're into new all-time highs, and we're doing all of this before we hit the mid-range point being sometime in November 2024, then at that point, I'm personally going to be expecting that we're having an early cycle top. And so these are the two scenarios that we have for this cycle. Either one, we're going to continue to follow the normal 4-year cycle, we'll end up peaking on the right side of this, 3 years up, 1 year down, the typical 4-year trend that we've been on. Or we have a left translated where we end up front running this cycle, we break out, make new all-time highs before we've had the mid-range point, and we end up topping prematurely. We have a Bitcoin halving that's going to be April of 2024. Up to this point, every single one of our halvings have been a big buy moment where we always see the market break out. I'm going to make the halvings green so that you guys can kind of see. This was our last Bitcoin halving, and then the price instantly skyrocketed. Our last Bitcoin halving in 2016 was right here. The price instantly skyrocketed. Our Bitcoin halving, our first Bitcoin halving happened here, and the price instantly skyrocketed. So we do have a pattern here where every halving we end up, the price breaks out like crazy. But let's assume that, our halving is sometime mid-2024. If Bitcoin is already at all-time highs or new all-time highs leading into our halving, that's something we've never done before. Every one of our halvings, we've been significantly below the all-time highs. Below the all-time highs. Below the all-time highs, right? That's been the case every one of our halvings. However, if this cycle is different, and if we're already sitting at all-time highs to new all-time highs, and we have that Bitcoin halving, I'm personally going to be leaning towards us having an early cycle top, it being a left translated cycle, and us literally having a completion of our entire Bitcoin trend. Like I stated, if we end up having a left translated cycle, it's supposed to start the opposite of a 4-year cycle. It would be a bearish 4-year cycle. So instead of having these magical 3-year bull markets and 1-year bear markets, we'd have literally 3 years down and then 1 year up. It'd just be crazy, crazy, crazy. And then we would just erase all of the value that we pretty much accumulated over the course of the last 10 years. So this is just something that we need to keep a note of, because as we all know, the more adoption that comes, there's only so much buy support that can happen. And we're getting closer and closer to a point of true adoption with Bitcoin. We already have a lot of on-ramps that we never had. There's all this talk about the BlackRock ETF. In my opinion, there's not a whole lot else that needs to happen for us to get true mainstream adoption. If I had to guess what I think will happen, I think we'll have a right translated cycle. I think that we will peak on the right side of the trend. But if we do, I really don't think that we're going to have more 4-year cycles after this. I think that this really could be the last one that we have, where we peak sometime at the end of the year 2025. And then after that, maybe the next cycle going into it ends up being the left translated. Maybe that's the true cycle top. I can't say specifically, but all I can share with you guys is how to know and how to put the data points so that we do understand that. Because like I said, guys, if the market starts breaking out, we start front running this cycle like we have never done prior, that's a big red flag, because we'll be doing something that we've never done before. All the average people will be saying, if Bitcoin's already breaking out and making new all-time highs before the halving, everybody's going to be looking at the halving as the ultimate catalyst to just send Bitcoin to $1 million, when most likely it's going to end up being a sell the news type of event. So we have to factor in all of these sort of things. Like I stated, guys, all of our other cycles, Bitcoin's been at the beginning stages of the uptrend, and we've been below all-time highs before the halving's ever taken place. So once that halving takes place, that's kind of, what gives Bitcoin the push into new all-time highs. Whether you believe that or not, everybody's got their own opinion. Some people don't even think the halvings matter. But we do see a pattern here where once the halving happens, that's kind of the point where Bitcoin skyrockets. So I don't care why it is, it does happen though. So when we're looking at this next cycle, like I stated, if we're sitting, below all-time highs, maybe Bitcoin even runs, let's remove some of these drawing tools. Maybe Bitcoin ends up running to 48K, and then we correct, and we kind of go through this long, slow process, And then we're at that halving once again, below all-time highs in a similar way that all the other cycles have. I'm personally going to lean towards that being a similar type of cycle, and we're most likely going to end up topping in the same sort of ways that all of our other ones have. And it'll do something like this, probably similar to our last cycle. However, guys, once again, if this thing's front running and we're into new all-time highs before the halving and we're leading the mid-range point, I'm personally thinking that this is left translated and it will most likely end our 4-year cycles as a whole. As of right now, I think we're going to have a normal right translated. I think we will have a true 4-year cycle because our last cycle did actually play out like that. The most likely scenario is us to have continuation, and that's just the basic rules when it comes to analyzing 4-year cycles. So with all that being said, wanted to give you guys this update, summarize some thoughts. I know a lot of you guys had questions on how I draw these, how I analyze these. Well, now that you guys understand, you should be able to go do this yourselves. Keep in mind that altcoins aren't going to follow 4-year cycles. There's very few of them that do. So when we're analyzing 4-year cycles, we like to stick to Bitcoin because it's always the thing that follows them, and everything kind of follows Bitcoin in turn. So just remember that. If you have questions, drop them in the comment section. I'm happy to help answer any of them. If you guys found value in this, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you guys want to join the Discord server where I post my private picks, all of my investments, anything that I'm buying with my money going into this next cycle, links are in the description for that. That's really the place where, now that we're at the beginning of the cycle, like I stated, guys, I've made a multiple 100x opportunities, and that was in a last cycle where I wasn't quite as prepared as I am now. I've been doing a lot of research trying to find great altcoins that have that 50 to 100x plus potential, and I really do believe that I found a lot of them. So if you guys want to be able to see what those are, links are in the description to go ahead and sign up on my website. Links are in the description to go ahead and find anything that you want to reach out to me. With that being said, thank you all so much for the support, and I will catch you in the next one. As always, peace out.